We're going off to Hong Kong. The jurisdiction is pushing to become a major Web3 hub, with the government recently establishing a task force for promoting Web3 development. Joining us now is Animoca Brands co-founder and executive chairman, Yat Siu. Good morning, Yat.
Hello, how are you? Nice to be here. It's actually more like good evening here, but anyway, it's nice to be here.
It is our morning. It's your evening. We're just a global show. It's wonderful to have you. Now, you're among 15 people in that task force. Animoca Brands is headquartered in Hong Kong. Talk to us about what your role is going to be.
Well, I mean, it is what it says, right? The role is basically to help promote Web3 development in Hong Kong. And the role entails not just local development, but also to bring in overseas talent. I mean, there's already, thousands of individuals and companies that are now looking to apply for licenses or setting up shop in Hong Kong in areas of Web3 development. And I think the other thing that's fascinating is that this isn't just a government initiative. It's also trying to bring in private enterprise and bringing in basically companies like ours that know something about the space and driving the space. I think it also demonstrates Hong Kong's really goal to be the Web3 leader, not just actually in the region, but, in some ways, given some of the, I guess, less friendly actions happening in other parts of the world, I think there's an opportunity for Hong Kong, and that's what they see as well, to become a global leader, really, in the development of Web3, crypto, blockchain, and digital assets. And that's really part of our job to basically help make Hong Kong stay relevant and to continue develop basically, progressive frameworks as Hong Kong has done so far.
Given your experience, is there going to be a focus on bringing business from the gaming sector, the DAO sector over to Hong Kong?
I mean, that's certainly one area that we're going to support, but it's basically everything. Web3 covers DeFi, covers, everything related to crypto, covers exchanges, and of course covers non-fungible tokens, gaming, also education, as we're doing most recently, and other forms of, basically culture as well. So it's the whole gamut.
So if you can, this particular task force, what do you think the long-term effects will have on mainland China? Do you think that this serves as a model or a potential a laboratory, if you will, for the mainland to change its policies? As you talked about regulatory crackdowns, if you will, on crypto in many countries, including the United States. But will this ultimately change the mainland's mind with how it deals with crypto?
Well, I mean, we just have to look at the lens of what's happened just a few weeks ago. In early June, Hong Kong announced basically that it allowed for retail trading for 16 cryptos that are out there. And just around the same week, Beijing came out and put out a Web3 strategy paper and specifically said that, Web3 is the future of the next sort of iteration of the internet, and China has to lead in that area. So that's one. And then, of course, on national TV, as in CCTV, they were broadcasting about the development in Hong Kong and the fact that you can buy Bitcoin there. And this went across basically every Chinese sort of citizen in the national broadcaster. So, you could say that maybe it's just a very interesting coincidence, or the other perspective is to say maybe this was not so much of a coincidence after all. Hong Kong has always been a sandbox for China when it comes particularly to financial services. And when you think of Hong Kong's role in the past, it's always been the gateway for the development of the financial services in and out of China, right? The FDI that goes from foreign investment into China often routes through Hong Kong and vice versa. It's, you don't have a sort of free exchange of, for instance, foreign currencies in China, but you do have it in Hong Kong, which is basically, a renminbi clearinghouse, as an example. And so we expect the same thing to happen in digital assets and crypto as well. And of course, the other thing is that, for China, there is a wider theme around that, which is, given everything that's happening in the US, there's sort of two themes. And this, by the way, isn't just for China. It includes places like Japan, Middle East, and even Europe in the same lens. One of them, of course, is dependency on the dollar. So really strengthening, crypto, one perspective is to say that it's sort of a broader attempt or a broader move for, sort of a form of de-dollarization. That's obviously one, I guess, agenda that sort of serves, I guess, various interests. And the second one is also to sort of really think about it, reduce the influence of predominantly American technologies, right? If you think about what's happening in the Web2 space, the whole world, for the most part, with the exception of countries, including China, is dependent on US-based technologies, whether it's Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Apple, you name it. And that actually is something that is risky from an American, from a national sovereign perspective as well. So all of these sort of agenda items come together to try to, and there's a very strong reason why you want to develop and promote Web3, not just for Hong Kong and China, but also in Japan and in Korea and in the Middle East and Southeast Asia and many other countries.
Yeah, it's so great to see you. So I want to just dig in more to this Hong Kong question. So Hong Kong actually, in some ways, seems very similar to Japan in the sense that both are sending very welcoming messages to the crypto industry, in stark contrast to some countries that shall remain unmentioned, like the United States. But
Yes.
but when you kind of scratch beneath the surface, and I don't say this is not a bad thing at all. This is not meant as a negative judgment, but both of those jurisdictions, Hong Kong and Japan, are not easy. In fact, I think they're going to be very, very difficult. And so I just want to talk to you a little bit about that, because I think with Hong Kong specifically, there's been a lot of fanfare about licensed exchanges, but there's very few exchanges licensed in Hong Kong. It's only a handful. I know it's quite early, but even, for example, opening up to retail traders, it sort of depends on how you frame it, because before there was already retail trade in Hong Kong, via OTC. Now it's more like they're saying if you're not licensed to do retail, you can't do it, right? So it sort of depends on how you look at it. So I guess my question for you is practically speaking, how difficult is it to actually operate in Hong Kong? Because it strikes me as it will be a relatively challenging environment for exchanges, just because there's a lot of rules. And again, it's not a bad thing, but it seems like it might be more challenging than some people would expect, given how welcoming the rhetoric is.
Well, I guess, first of all, regulation is broadly a good thing in the sense that once you actually put a regulatory framework, you give confidence to the consumer as well, right? I think one of the things that, one could make an assumption as to what's happening in some of these unnamed places, as you say, is the lack of regulation actually removes or sort of creates a kind of concern and doubt, and also basically doesn't give it any legitimacy. Because the moment you start to regulate it, you give it legitimacy, regardless of how strict the rules are, because you're basically acknowledging that this is an asset, that this is something that is going to be here to stay, and you have to find a form of regulation. Now, I actually think the exchange, sort of the rules for the exchange, hash key, and then there's of course there's a bunch of other basically exchanges that have already received it. And again, you have to remember, this stuff really sort of kicked off in really early November, effectively. And in that time, not only are there crypto ETFs, the HKMA already issued a tokenized green bond. The monetary authority actually sent out a notice to banks, as you may have recalled, that said, hey, you got to start doing business with crypto companies, and you got to sort of be smart about it, as opposed to just simply saying no. I think it's probably the only regulator that has sent a message across multiple banks. HSBC, which is one of the world's largest banks, basically now started to allow the purchase of these crypto ETFs to their clients as well. So there's a lot of development that's happening throughout, and it's actually a very welcoming climate. And the main thing is that it's not just about the exchanges. That's only one component. And these are probably the ones that do require the most regulation, just because of everything that's happened. I don't think that's a bad thing. But it also invites all the other industries around it, because what's happening in other places where regulation isn't clear, it affects businesses who are making NFTs, for instance, who are doing blockchain gaming, who are doing sort of crypto art, for instance. These are not, by any stretch, should be considered as something risky or problematic. But in those places where there's no clear regulation, people are fearful. Whereas in Hong Kong, at least, you can say, oh, well, okay, fine. So they've made it very clear NFTs aren't going to be regulated, for instance, in the classic sense, and they're welcome to do business, and they can just open up. And by the way, they can open up a bank account as well, which is another big thing, because in many crypto companies struggle to open bank accounts, frankly, anywhere in the world, just because of all the concerns that have been put out by some other places in the world that shall not be named.
Well, thank you. I think that was actually a very detailed summary, because I think sometimes it's hard to get a sense of what exactly is happening in Hong Kong. Quickly, I want to just turn to a totally different topic, which is gaming, GameFi, Web3 gaming. I was at the event in Kyoto, IVS, bunch of Animoca people were there. It seems like everybody in Asia is talking about gaming, right? And game. It seems like that's really a big topic. And I'm just curious, given that you're sort of in the center of that world, where do you see some of the hotspots for gaming in Asia? I'm hearing a lot of talk about Japan, hearing a lot of talk about Korea, obviously Southeast Asia. I'm just curious, what you're seeing. What are some of the interesting trends you're seeing in sort of the GameFi world?
I mean, those are some of the main trends that you mentioned. I mean, outside of crypto native companies like ourselves, you also have basically the big publishers and game developers in Japan and Korea. I mean, you've got Krafton, the creators behind PUBG. You've got Sega. You've got Square Enix, the creators behind, Final Fantasy and so on. These are major mainstream companies, all embracing Web3, thinking about digital property rights and non-fungible tokens. Many of them that we're working with as well, right? And in stark contrast to what's happening in places like the US, for instance, where game developers are, maybe secretly wanting to do it but can't, just because there's a revolt either internally in the company or even within their customers. So it's quite a big contrast. Southeast Asia obviously is a big one as well, and then of course places like the Middle East. I mean, places like UAE and Saudi, for instance, are also very much embracing this trend. So I would say that what you should be expecting, and certainly that's our sort of forecast, is in the next 12 to 18 months, many of those games that have been in development for the last 2 years are going to be released. And a good game does take many years to produce. And these games are going to have all the high fidelity and the kind of graphics that, I guess the more sophisticated gamers are expecting. And so we think, in the next 12 to 18 months, we're going to see those games come out and sort of have a real impact, where people from, let's call it the Web2 gaming world, are just going to play these Web3 games because it's fun and entertaining, and then basically get sort of onboarded and introduced to everything that relates to sort of, I guess, GameFi and the lot.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining us this morning for us. Thanks for staying up for us. That was Animoca Brands Executive Chairman Yat Siu.